Why are you here? The reason is that there is a BIVEC, that's the Benelux Inter-University Association of Transport Researchers, from Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, transport researchers, and they have every year, I think, a distinguished professor that does three lectures, 2 in Belgium and 1 in the Netherlands, and today did 1 in the Netherlands. Why am I here? Because BIVEC asked me, as scientific director of TRAIL, my name is Jan Anema, as scientific director of TRAIL, to organize this on behalf of BIVEC. So TRAIL is a research call for PhDs. Well, without much ado, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's hope no further snafus on the technology side. Okay, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about a couple of projects which we recently had, which are all aiming to integrate the decision about working from home and its impact on transport. Now, we didn't quite get as far as I had hoped, so the results are preliminary, but I hope they shed a bit of light on some of the results and some of the avenues for future work. First, acknowledgements. These are the PhD students who contributed to this work. Daniel Heimgartner, but primarily on the Swiss New Normal, Ariane Meister on EBIS, or Salah then also did the integration work on the working from home results into Matze, and Caroline Linke worked on the Time Use Plus survey, which is one of the bases of the project. Okay. Let's talk about Time Use Plus first. Time Use Plus was a survey where we had 1,300 people reporting to us with the help of an app their time use over a 4-week period. And this survey ran at least for year 22 and 23. So this is a very good basis on observing whether people work from home, because all of our existing travel diary surveys don't capture working from home. They might ask, are you in principle working from home, but they have no clue what happens and where it happens. And a time use survey, because it's much more detailed, tells you where they work, not only at work, but at other places. Time Use Plus not only captured the time use, but it captured the activities and the expenditures for those activities. And then, because it was based on a GPS tracking effort, we know exactly where people were. So we have time use, locations, all the transport elements, plus expenditure. And why did we want to have that? Because there was earlier work which we did with Sergio Yaradias, where he showed and we showed that we can estimate not only the value of time, but the value of leisure. This is work which is still outstanding, which still needs to be done. The protocol of that study was we had a recruitment survey, and this was based on official registry data, which is in Switzerland relatively easy to obtain, plus a bit of commercial data because the first data wasn't enough. Address wasn't. When the people entered the recruitment survey and they qualified for our study, they were passed on to a download link so that they and their specific address and name could be linked together, and they then entered motion tag, which is the piece of software which we use, which is well established. It's produced by a firm in Berlin to do GPS-based travel surveys. And that data was then integrated in an app which we got written for us by people in the ESA block, which then essentially asked them about what they did and how they traveled and what actually activities that they did and how much money they spent. One problem we had is that we didn't ask for the exact timing of the activities, but only whether they did something during the activity, which we had observed in GPS tracking data. They got reminders if they hadn't done enough validation of their results, because we asked them to have a minimum number of validated days so that the data was useful for us in our analysis. And if you ever do a survey like that, throw people out as quickly as possible when you identify that they're not doing what they're doing. It's much more difficult if they think they get the money after 8 weeks, but they haven't done enough. And you have to tell them, oh, but since day 2, you didn't participate. If you spot that, tell them that. Then there was a debriefing survey about further questions which we hadn't asked so far, and then they receive the incentive. Incentives, we think are important for such a study. And I'll show you the response rates to know, and we can speculate what would happen if we don't provide incentives. The level of the incentive is unclear. And because we are here talking about GPS studies, this is kind of a couple of things you have to think about whenever you do such a study. You have to have this download and installation if eligible. So throw out people which are not eligible. Have frequently asked questions leaflets. Have a strong help desk. Have standard answers for that help desk to answer. Because all these GPS tracking surveys are fiddly. And they are particularly fiddly because there are so many versions of the operating systems that they interact with that and things don't work. So you have to have people who answer questions and who are able to take people through all the steps if necessary. And that help desk is obviously needs to be there throughout the whole study. Validation. If you do ask for validation, so you ask if the phone or the algorithm of the GPS tracking software has identified modes and purposes correctly. You ask them to correct if necessary. But we'd never asked that they had to correct everything, because otherwise it becomes an enormous amount of work for the respondents. But we wanted to have at least 5-6 days so that we could write further software based on our own data to correct the assumptions of the GPS tracking software. So it is worthwhile to have validation. Then use for yourself. For the survey side, you want a dashboard to see what happens, how many people participate, how many people dropping off, and have that pipeline for the respondent feedback. And that was particularly important in a study which was called MOBIS, where we told people about the externalities they were producing. That was part of the overall design. And you have to have then that pipeline which calculates all the externalities with the data as it comes in. You don't want to wait for long. You have to have that ready so that within a couple of days you can send that information back. The debrief survey is crucial, in particular, if you aren't sure if people have understood what you did with them. And we had one study, and actually 2 studies, where we wanted to know to what extent road pricing would change behavior. And that road pricing obviously was motivated by the externalities that people produced. In this MOBIS study, we found out that those who didn't understand what externalities are didn't respond or changed behavior much less than those who knew what an externality was. So you definitely want to know in your analysis who had understood the concept and who didn't. So in the debrief survey, check whether people have understood the intellectual basis of whatever measure or policy you're trying. Incentive payments, because the number of the samples are large, and they are large, have to be large if you want to have enough power, statistical power to say something. But that means you don't want to write an individual money transfer for each and every incentive. You want somebody else to do it. And ideally, your finance department of the university does it for you. So check if they're willing and happy to do that. If not, do something. This is just to give you an idea how Time Use Plus looked. So it was based on GPS, so we knew exactly where people were driving. We could add details to the events, the activities we had. They then told us exactly what the purpose was within, and also expenditures and who came along with them. So it's also has a bit of a social network aspect to it. And the data set is available for further analysis. And if you want to work with it, let me know, because my group doesn't exist anymore, and I'm pretty sure we will never be able to do all the analysis. So I'm happy, and we are happy to share that. Now, the incentive level. I pointed out that we don't really know what the ideal incentive levels are. We did a small pretest for Time Use Plus, where we varied two things. We varied the amount of money people got, 50 or 100 Swiss francs, and we varied the level of detail in which they had to describe the activities they were doing validation. And we had assumed that if we make it easier, i.e. not as detailed, people would be happier to participate because they didn't have to make that much work. But it turned out, and the time between 14 and 20. And what happened, as you can see at the end, that the response participation rates were not, for 50 francs, were all about the same. It didn't really matter if you asked them to participate for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And it didn't really matter whether you asked them for a highly detailed or a rougher description. And the other thing, which is why we didn't go for 100, was that we didn't get a doubling of the response rate. We just got, 50% more people participating, 2.6 to 3 point something. So in the end, we decided we don't want to spend 100 because it doesn't really pay off. And we went for 4 weeks, and we went for the high detail. But this was obviously a very small effort here. So this is something which somebody who does another big study might want to do at a larger scale to be absolutely sure where the choice should be. So that's unclear. Now, the other thing is 3.6% or 2.6%. That's horrible. In the end, in the main study, we got something like 3.5% participation rate or response rate. And clearly, most statisticians would run away and say, oh, you can't do anything with this data. Okay, you can take that position, but what do you do? So what I have here is a summary of various GPS tracking-based studies where I plotted completion rate versus the numbers of days tracked, which normally means also validation days required. And you can see that if you have just 1 day, people have been able to get response rates of over 30%. Okay, that kind of reduces the worry about the self-selection of the people into the study. But for 1 day, it's an exceedingly expensive day to capture that. You have to have the software, you have to have the help desk, you have to have the recruitment, you send out all those letters. It just is extremely expensive just to collect 1 day. And for that reason, most people go for 7, then maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. The problem is that response rate dropped precipitously right away. And yes, you can help by motivated. Here is motivated normally by money, there's an incentive involved. You get higher response rates. But in principle, 7 or more days, you get massive self-selection. So the trade-off you have is 1 day, which is extremely expensive per trip observed, for multiple days, but you have to put in the work of modeling the self-selection into the problem, into the study. I would argue that it's worse having the self-selection analysis and have all of those days, because there are certain things you can't possibly observe with 1 day. This is stability, variance, learning, updating, response to a policy. You can't observe that with a 1 day study. It's just cross-sections. So, yes. But you have the other work on modeling the self-selection. Good. There's a couple of methodological issues with GPS I want to share as well, because you might be interested in that. The first and foremost thing is how quickly are people dropping out of a study. And here, this is MOBIS. This was a virtual road pricing study, random control trial. And here, the analysis shows you how quickly people drop out based on the phone they're using, iPhone or Android, by length of study. And you can see that in the first 8 weeks, the dropout is manageable. So you have about 20%, 15% people dropping out in that period, which is okay. But what you see is that the iPhone interface is much better, so less dropout. So the message here is do invest in your user interface. Make it smooth, make it easy, so that people don't get confused. And you saw here our vain attempt to get Teams to work. This is just a bad user interface. What else? They don't guide you to what you have to do. Therefore, at least my attitude to Teams is I don't touch it if I don't have to. So invest in the user interface. And as you can see, if you in MOBIS continued then into a study during COVID period, some people continued to use the software for quite a long while. So you have people who are interested in the results, in the feedback you give them, and they will participate. Now, again, you have to ask, why are these people willing to spend 26 weeks in such a study? But there are people who keep diaries. So why not? There are people who have other motivations to stay with it. So for analysis, the question is, okay, how do you deal with it? That's the first thing. And the other thing you have to worry about is, can we say something about who is dropping out? And this is EBIS. This was a second virtual pricing study. And here, okay, I don't show the Android iPhone difference, but that was here as well. But here's difference by age in the dropout. And again, you can see there are systematic differences between people. And that tells you you probably have to oversample certain groups from the very beginning if you want to make sure that you have enough of them at the end. And here, it's surprising, it was the old people who stuck with it longer than the young people. So all this talk about technical savviness is, in my view, just talk. And people don't remember that the old people about which they talk have been seen the development of all that technology over the last 30 years, in contrast to a 15-year-old who has no clue. Anyway, so there are other reasons why the response rate is different. And you have to account for that in your sampling strategies to balance that later on. Now, working from home. Working from home is obviously a big topic, but remember, maybe 30% of people are eligible to work from home. The others, 40%, depending on country, depending on the city or region you're working in, the number is limited. And then the second question you have to ask yourself, the question, how many are allowed by their employers? How many people can, because they actually have the physical and social environment at home to work from home? And then how many want? Because some people just don't want to work from home because they like being in the office, they like being away from there. So the actual share of people who can do it is then some reduction of those 30% who are allowed to. Now, let me show you what we had and found in Switzerland. This is Swiss time use. This is based on this time use plus study. And you can see that Switzerland is not unusual when you compare it to other European welfare states, left and right. They do work a bit longer than the rest of the Europeans, but not sans chance. And then personal care leisure. So Switzerland is pretty much where you'd expect it. One thing you probably realize is that the European Union has a program of running time use surveys in its member states. It's a requirement as a member state that you participate in a time use study. There will be a next round of those time use studies that's coming up in the next couple of years. The problem with the time use studies as they are, they don't worry about transport and they don't worry about locations. So it's not as useful for us as a survey like Time Use Plus would be, because it combines time use, expenditure, and location and mode. Then working from home, now here divided up by people who are employed with children and no children. And I think the key message I want to give with this slide, or variants of it, is that people work all days of the week. Clearly, they work less on the weekends, but they are still quite active. And they're working from home as well as working in the office. And what we don't see, we see that a bit, is that there's obviously a pattern across the week. And certainly in Switzerland, once that established itself, people work from home on Mondays and Fridays, which for the managers is a problem because in the first instance, it looks like extending the weekend. So knowing that people work whenever might reduce the worries of the management of the firms. Now, we have to remember that what academics do, which work every day of the week, every hour of the week, is not normal. But here you get an idea that in attenuated form, this happens in the rest of the population as well. The next thing is, what is the impact of the number of declared days working from home? So we asked the respondents, how many days are you working from home officially? 0 to 3, 3 to 4, or 5 days a week. 5.5 days. In Switzerland, it's completely normal to have part-time contracts. You can have a 90% contract or 80% contract or whatever contract you like. Yes? Okay, I explained that. Right, quite right to point it out. So it's working from home, working from elsewhere other, and working from work. And you can see that the hours worked varies by the numbers of days people officially working from home days. These are the official numbers, this is what that contract says. And you can see that people work from home or elsewhere, even on days on which they're not supposed to work. And you can see when you, for example, look at the last 4.5 to 5 days, you can see the hours worked, working from work, and those who have 0 days working from home obviously have the highest numbers of hours at the office, and it goes down with the number of days officially. But even those with 5 days working from home, they still spend 50 hours working from the office, and similar effects elsewhere. So working from home is a mechanism which allows you, or you have to work from anywhere, any day of the week. So the management problem, or the problem for the labor unions, is how to make sure that people just work what they are contracted to work. And the issue is obviously for the employer side, they might less worry about it, but even employers should worry about it because the level of concentration, the chances of burnout, the amount of integration of the work becomes an issue if people work any time of the day. Not everybody is a PhD student who should work all hours of the week. In the knowledge that after that, you'll be done and never touch that again. But anyway, so what we observe in Switzerland is that working from home has loosened the boundaries between work and leisure enormously, and you see systematic effects there, but there's still this work needs to be replicated elsewhere. because so time use plus and working from home is a major issue then also for modeling. Because if people work from everywhere, you have to ask yourself, okay, how do you capture this in our models? Because if they work, their willingness to pay might change on the durations, and their willingness to travel further or to particular locations will be affected by the knowledge that they work everywhere. Okay. Questions so far? Yes?
When you say officially contracted,
Yeah.
you mean that the employer agrees with the employee that we can work from home
Yes.
for 3 days?
Yes, exactly.
But if you can repeat the question, I'm not sure.
Okay. He is asking about what the 2 or 3 days mean.
Yeah, I mean, can the employees choose to work otherwise, I mean, more at the office? Are they flexible?
I think it depends obviously on the employer. But yes, certainly in Switzerland, it's now normal that you negotiate with your manager or the firm how many days you want to work from home. And that's in your labor contract, which tells you, yes, you are allowed to work 1 or 2 days home. And currently, if I remember right, there's a number of 1.6 days working from home is the national average. But the respondents, the persons actually would rather work 2.5 days from home. So the 1.6 current aren't really the full extent to which people would want to work from home. The question is, if you have this substantial share of the population which works from home, what does that do to your modeling? I think you can't really just model the average, because we do know that working from home means that most people work from home Monday or Friday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is different. So in principle, for your modeling, demand modeling, you would want to have 2 models at least, one for Monday and Friday and one for the rest of the week, to look at the impact that has. Because clearly, if they don't work from the office, they might work from other places. This is working from elsewhere, which is obviously not really that big a deal, but it still can be quite substantial. So people travel to other places, and that means that your destination choice models will be messed with. So working from home, fully integrated, means that ideally you have 2 models, Monday, Friday versus rest of the week, and you improve your destination choice models so that you capture the work from elsewhere. Now, the other thing which obviously working from home does is it changes the daily patterns, because if you work from home, you might do your work, let's say from 7 till 10 at night, and you do something else during the day. That means that we need to have models which actually optimize and find the daily patterns. I'll talk at the very end about the current technologies which we have. When we started the project, in particular when Aurore Salah wanted to integrate it into her PhD, she thought that we would be able to have a formal model of the reconfiguration of the schedules. Unfortunately, we didn't get that far, and so we used another approach to capture the impacts of working from home. And this is really an upper and a lower bound so that we can see what the likely impacts are. So we set up the scenario. This is a MATSIM scenario, and as you might know, MATSIM is an agent-based model which takes the population, its activity patterns, and then iterates their travel till equilibrium. So you need a population. In Switzerland, that's relatively easy because you're allowed to get registered data, so you get the original state numbers. We have the Time Use Plus survey, and we have the macrocensus, the National Travel Diary survey from 2015, which gave us activity patterns. And we had the mobility tool ownership and we took that from the study, the Swiss New Normal. I'll show that in a minute. The network, we focused on Zurich, and we just took an existing EVT network, which we had, and calibrated. And then scenarios, we used various extremes because we didn't have tools to model the impact in marginal effects, so we just looked at extremes. Now, so what is the impact of working from home on mobility tool ownership? Mobility tool ownership, for me, is the tools you buy where you make a trade-off. You spend once quite a lot of money, and afterwards you just have your tool and the much lower generalized cost of travel. It is car ownership, motorcycle ownership, it's bike ownership, it's a season ticket for public transport, and maybe a season ticket for other sharing services as well. We had the assumption that working from home will change that. And we also fantasized that it might reduce car ownership, because people might not need the car as much. Daniel Heingartner, in his survey, explored that. He asked, and he did various SP experiments. And the outcome of this was that it didn't. It doesn't have an impact on mobility through ownership. This is e-bike, car sharing. This is a discount card for public transport. It only had an impact on long duration season tickets for public transport. It's interesting when you see here the half fare ticket, which is a ticket in Switzerland where you pay once, I think it's about 200 francs. And for the rest of the year, you get 50% discount on all rail travel and all local public transport as well. You have that in the Netherlands as well. And Switzerland includes the buses and some of the mountain railways as well. So it's a bit more generous. And you can see it does increase with home occurrence frequency, but not massively. But the impact on the public season ticket is noticeable and massive. He also estimated choice models, which we can then integrate into the pipeline for MATSIM to see what happens. Good. So what scenarios did Aurore and the project come up with? The extreme scenarios is if you start with a day which includes going to work once and then from work to other locations. One scenario is to say, extreme scenario is to say, okay, any trips which are attached to work trips are cancelled. That's it. That's one extreme. Then you can say, okay, just the work trip is cancelled, and we then choose new locations for the other trips, which had been in the plan. Then we could, we didn't update the location. In this scenario, we did update the locations. And finally, we just use the time use plus days. So not the microcensus from 2015, but use the observed time use daily patterns out to time use plus, which, because there working from home was normal and real, so that would reflect the reality with working from home. Not perfect, but a solution. And I will not go into details too much because we didn't really see all that much change. Here, I show you the results for mode choice between bike, car passengers, public transport, and walk for the different scenarios. There's baseline, which is today, Monday, Friday, and then you can see that there are, on mode choice, there's essentially no impact. The only impact you do see is that public transport gets down, which is reasonable as the season ticket ownership goes down, and with season ticket ownership commitment to public transport, you see a loss. Aurore Salah will provide further analysis of her data in the weeks to come. But the key impact was we don't really see that much impact. Okay, So what needs to be done if you wanted to do that properly? I think in Switzerland, we would need to build a synthetic population because all of our results we are unable to share because we're using real people in the data set. So we have to change that. We need to look at new schedules. So how do people adapt their schedules with working from home? And I suggested there was a thesis in Lausanne, Janoni Pugbala, and I'll show more alternatives we have. We need the mobility tool ownership. And in Switzerland, we can use the results from the Swiss New Normal study, but you would have to do similar exercises to find out how people respond to not working from home. We would like to have new networks, and you might have heard, and I'll talk about it, there's a project called eBike City, where we plan to do massive changes to the network, and we want to see how that impacts then interaction with working from home. And finally, we would like to look at further scenarios, mobility pricing, and we want to have a working from home model, which includes a bit more constraints than currently are in it, because I think society hasn't really negotiated working from home fully, so there needs to be done more work that needs to be reflected in the models. The survey, yes, I think you should repeat time use plus, as expensive and difficult as this would be. We would have to update time use plus and not only find out what people did, but when they did it, when they were at a certain location. Because at this point, we just know they worked from home, but we don't know whether they worked from home. Let's say they returned home at 5. Did they immediately start to work from home, or did they work from home between 9 o'clock to midnight? I think that has an impact on the behavior. So we need to capture that. And finally, we ran time use plus from midnight to midnight. I think that's a bad idea. So you run any travel diary survey from 4 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock the next morning, because you capture the functional day. And those few people who have to work night shift are so rare that we can cope with them. Now, this issue about how to model and construct schedules is something which has engaged the field for a long time, but maybe not to the extent it should have, because we are quite happy if we get mode choice and destination choice right. But the rest of the dimensions of a daily plan, we kind of ignore. So what possibilities do you have, and what has been suggested so far? You can use statistical matching. So if you have a time use plus survey, you can use that and the days with working from home and then match them to. That's what we did in this study I just showed you. You can use activity-based models that in the tradition of Bowman and BIVEC-GIBET. These are these large systems of nested logit models with all of the difficulties you have in getting them estimated. Here, the main problem is generating the choice sets for them. And it has become clear for a while that you need large choice sets. It isn't good enough just to have 5 different alternatives. You probably need 100 new days in this choice set so that you get appropriate and stable results. Whenever you do a choice model of, let's say, destination choice or route choice, I advise you, your alternative set should be 100 alternatives. And only then you can start trusting the parameters you get out. Well, I think I do say so because we did it, and it's quite obvious. We did it in the context of route choice of cyclists, and we started with, I don't know, 5 alternative routes or 10 alternative routes. Then we had 20, 30, 40, 60, 80, and the parameters didn't stabilize. So the parameters are essentially at the mercy of the size of your choice set. And that's true for all the choices where you have large numbers of alternatives. Okay, the question is, why should I worry? I think at this point, we just observe that the parameters aren't stable if the choice set changes, increases. Now you ask, okay, what about people? We have no clue. We just see that they aren't stable. And yes, you could try to find rules or heuristics and capture the real choice sets of the respondents, of the participants. And I wish you good luck. Because so far, none of the algorithms, none of the literature which suggests that they can capture the real choice set is convincing. I think another way, in particular on the choice side, you can avoid the whole issue is use something like recursive logic, which implicitly has the complete choice set as part of its system. And I think for choice modeling, for root choice modeling, I would advise you use RLogit and then do whatever else you like and then compare. If the two things have some similarity, you're fine. Otherwise, you're in trouble.
So you're saying use 100 alternatives or 100 choice sets that within them they have alternatives?
You want 100 alternatives. And let's say in the case of root choice, you want not the chosen root and 5 alternatives, you want the chosen root and 100 alternatives.
That is
Non-chosen alternatives. Okay, if you have indeed a multi-day survey, but most people don't have it, but it's just that you really have to be sensible and alert to the fact that your results are subject to the choice set and its size and its construction. And you might want to really test it to find out if it does make a difference. Then there are a couple of other approaches which have been put forward to build activity schedules, because activity schedules in principle is the worst you can think of given the degrees of freedom you have. And there is Ordonez, a student of mine in Singapore, who developed an approach where he identified what he called the core patterns and then constructed the rest of the day around it. And he did it by constructing a network of activities and connections, and then looked for the shortest path through that network. Similar is work which was done in Eindhoven, Harry Timmermans and colleagues there. And again, they generated a network of possible paths to choose the best fitting one. Then recently, Jano Pugala and Tommy Lell and Michel Villers developed an approach to generate non-chosen daily schedules, and then essentially just use standard choice models to identify the utility obtained from activity and activity duration. That looks promising, in particular because her approach is fast enough to generate really large choice sets of non-chosen alternatives, non-chosen data schedules. So here we probably have a hope that these parameters stabilize. Then there are two other approaches at choice set at net schedule construction. There's Tasha, an approach by Mats Ruda and Eric Miller in Toronto. And there's ADAPT, which is an approach which was developed by Josh Old and Boris Median, which are using heuristics and existing activity duration distributions to generate days. And finally, there is CTAB, which is an approach which was inspired by some work of Harry Timmermans and Theo Renze to build multi-day schedules, looking at demand needs to construct the days. But at this point, the field is still undecided which of the alternatives works best. And maybe there are other alternatives which you haven't thought about. For example, I haven't really talked about using whatever machine learning approach of your preference. But I guess we do need to have that, because the alternatives we are thinking about will change the daily schedule so much so that we have to say something useful about what people do with their time. And these are just a starting set, and I'm looking forward to see the papers at Transportation when you submit them. Now, just a completely different thing, and I think I can spend 5 minutes on this, is e-bike city. As you probably all know, is that current transport policy will not reach its Paris goals. It's impossible. All the policies are way too soft and way too weak to get there. So we have to do something. And in Zurich, we thought, okay, let's start a discussion with a radical approach. Maybe first focus on the urban areas. Suburbia and the rural parts come later. And in this, we said, okay, e-bikes are pretty new still, and e-bikes enable just about everybody to use a bike and use it over relatively long distances as well. So it's not the whatever 3-4 kilometer radius, but it's a 10-15 kilometer radius. So the e-bike mobilizes essentially an urban area. So we wanted to find out what would happen if we give 50% of the road space to cyclists to allow them to feel safe. If we make sure that all addresses are still available with motorized vehicles, because safety, police, moving van, whatever you need to have, ambulance needs to get everywhere. We want to make sure that there is enough parking for services like the craftsman to deliver and come to an address, but not more. And we wanted to retain the existing public transport networks. Well, how would a city look like when you do that? And how would it work? The project started in July last year. So we are in about month 15, 16, 17, and it will run till July 25. And so I can show you some visualizations of how it might look like. So here, this is Zurich, and you can see that if you do take 50% of the road space, you get streets with essentially one-way streets for the cars, and you have a bi-directional bike path here. In this particular instance, we took away all the car parking on the road. We made sure that the tram stops are still where they are and where they stay, so that people can get there. And we can also watch this from the perspective of the cyclists, and you can see how the city might look like if we do this at scale. Lucas Ballo has developed software which allows you to read in the OSM network of the city you're interested in and redesign it. We are writing the pipelines so that we can evaluate this with MapSim so that see what the behavioral impacts of this would be. We are doing surveys to update our mode choice experiments for an e-bike city so that we push the respondents a bit harder to change behavior. Maybe that's not enough yet, but at least we're going to make a try. And with that, I'm open to questions, and there are plenty of information on the websites at the Institute.
Thank you very much. We can now take questions. Also, the people online can take questions.
So up to 3 days, we still see some working from home days out of 5. So how can I understand this? How can I understand this part?
I think the colors are for what they have legally contracted to do between 0 and 5. So we have everybody. And these are the days we observed in the survey.
Is it correct that the study stopped down for 8 weeks? So what's this?
Okay. MOBIS was a study where they did 4 weeks just tracking. This was the before. And then in weeks 5 till 8, they were randomly allocated to a treatment. Some just continued tracking, and some got feedback and said, you're generating this amount of externalities, and we are charging you for it. But what we did do, we gave them a budget based on the first 4 weeks. So, and we did that till week 8. But the study ended in the fall of 19. So Corona had started, and we saw that some people continued unprompted. They just continued to track. And then Corona really arrived in Europe, first in Lombardy and then in Switzerland. We invited all the participants again to be tracked. So they reinstalled the app and continued to track. And that's why we have 26 weeks here, and some actually had more than 100 weeks in the study. That data is available for you as well if you have an interest in it. In Time Use Plus, we just ask whether people order online as part of their activities. We did ask, as part of the MOBIS study, we did do stated choice experiments with the respondents about their online shopping behavior. And there is one paper which describes the results from that, but we didn't follow up on that and didn't continue with that. Yes, online shopping is a big issue, and that's another big question which we actually should integrate into the scheduling models, because people replace physical shopping versus online shopping. And that will be an interesting question, how much of a trade-off there is. At the moment, what we are doing, we have multiple days. So we have a model for Monday to Tuesday to Thursday, and we have a Monday, Friday model. So we have 2 models. Ideally, you would have a model which models the whole week. And they exist. We have built one, and this CTAP approach, which I described at the very end, is able to CTAP is actually able to look at periods of arbitrary length. So there we could actually capture whatever trade-off people make by deciding to work on Tuesday, what that then means for Wednesday to Friday. All the other models, you will have to have separate multiple models to run multiple days. I think working from home, unfortunately, we haven't done a full analysis of the Time Use Plus data, which is the first data set in which we do know when people work from home. I think it's just about the first which exists, but we haven't done the full analysis. So far, we didn't really see much rebound effects. But that's the big question. Will there be massive rebound effects or large rebound effects? Because when people work from home, do they do other things, and what other things? And that needs to be further analyzed. We haven't done that quite yet in the way I would like to see it. I don't think that the Dutch panel survey, okay, I would have to check whether they do ask whether this is a working from home day and when they work from home. I think you're much closer to it, but that's an obvious question you want to ask.
Are there some additional policies on how intersecting are operating?
Okay. At the moment, we are looking at it from a design point of view. The operational questions is second step. But the eBike-City project involves 7 groups from ETH and 1 group from APFL. And 1 group, that's Tasos Kavelas, looks at the traffic engineering impacts. And I will have to talk with him how far his students are with signal control for the eBike-City. But it's an interesting issue.
We need to be very clear that you make visualization of the city
Yeah.
when it becomes e-bike-City.
Yes.
Then you do a kind of take choice survey. People see it and they can make choices.
Okay, what we did, these were finished last week. One of my students, Lucas Meide Freitas, used a different visualization approach, but he showed how an e-bike-City situation would look like. And as part of that, he then embeds that in a mode choice survey. So it's not as nice as this, but better than other things. But there's lots of work to be honest. Lucas Ballo redesigned all of Zurich with his software. And I think the extra amount of detours is about 30%, because with all the one-way streets, people have to travel longer. So it's 30% more. But he didn't include there yet any congestion effects. That is the next step. That's the next step. But just in terms of length, it's about 30% more, which is much, but not as bad as I would have guessed. Now, in a Swiss context, you need to win a majority of the votes. So we weren't quite as radical as kind of downgrading the color everywhere.
Really debated.
Exactly. So we just started with that. And these other alternatives might be relevant, but we just want to get the discussion going. In the time use survey, we asked people to tell us how they filled the length of their stay at a particular location. We then didn't really ask about simultaneous things, but we did ask whether socially other people or children were with them. So we weren't that interested to find out that they were working with the TV blaring and the kids playing around their feet. So we didn't do that. But you're right, that's another additional thing you would want to do in a time use survey. I think in the survey we see that because we know where they are, and if they tell us they work there, that will be work from other in this analysis. Here, there's work from home, work from other, and work from work. So in the survey you see that. Now, how do you model that? You need a model of the activity schedule, and that's what I said is there are so many, but there are a number of alternatives how you can model that, and each has advantages, disadvantages, and we have no clue what the most robust, fastest, and most reliable way is to model whole daily schedules. We do know that the Bowman-Ben approach does work, but it's very hard to estimate, very hard to generate the non-chosen alternatives, and might not be the way if you're really interested in multiple days of the week, because at that point, the Nestor-Lodge model just explodes. You're just unable to do anything.
First, I have to thank you on behalf of Mario for your excellent presentation. And we will discuss with you the upper closure of this whole and that will be done later. We have 2 questions, but I posted only one because it's very long. And the first question is, in the discussion of time use plus, you mentioned that small response rate is still useful given the longitudinal aspect. How would the sample's validity be affected if it were recruited via snowballs?
Okay. Snowball, you definitely will have to look and model all the linkages. A snowball would have an advantage because you would get people who are likely to interact, and that would be of interest because if you want to model how people interact and influence each other. Snowball samples you can do them, but it's an extra hurdle with ethics approval. It's difficult enough to get our travel diaries approved, but snowballs are even more difficult and more expensive. Yes, all the more power to him if he's able to pull off a snowball sample of time use in the time use plus manner. We did only random sample. And we didn't check if the people by chance were neighbors, and we didn't find out, and we haven't checked if they worked in the same place. So we haven't really chased for the social networks. I think on the social networks, we are currently using yet another approach where we want to know which places people visit. And we call this part a place generator and then a place interpreter. And then we essentially do a small egocentric social network survey with the same respondents to find out how that allows us to do new analysis. There's the first couple papers of that surveys are available if you're interested. Yes, no, we didn't look at that. It would be really interesting.
I will send you the whole questions. Thank you, Mario, for your question. Thank you also, Mario, for making this event happening. Thank you very much. I will try to thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you, Kai. Maybe you should give an applause. There's now some soft drinks, and I hope to see you in another trail event.